Alright, so this is your EOC Evolution review. Like the other videos, this review is just meant to be something for you to just watch and follow along. You may need to pause on certain slides just so you can study the picture or diagram that's there, but don't take notes as you go through this. Use this as a review, kind of just listen and follow along. So first up, fossils and early life. So how old is the Earth? 4.6 billion years. Order of life on Earth, so we have the archaebacteria first, then the cyanobacteria, which they do photosynthesis. Then you have unicellular eukaryotes, then your multicellular eukaryotes. So the endosymbiotic theory is the theory of how eukaryotes evolved. So a large one ate a small one. In terms of prokaryotes, I should say. So a large prokaryote ate a small karyote, and they lived in a mutualistic relationship before eventually evolving into eukaryotes. So if you kind of look here, it shows a cell taking in a prokaryote, which is the little reddish pink one here, so it goes in. Then it finds a photosynthetic one that goes in to where eventually you have your cell with a chloroplast and a mitochondria, which would be a plant cell. So also in terms of fossils is just the early life. So absolute dating versus relative dating. So absolute dating is your exact age, whereas relative is just the approximate age. The lab we did in class was relative dating. We didn't look at actual fossils. We looked at cards to try to predict. So in a fossil sample, like this picture here, the oldest fossils are where? They're going to be on the bottom. And then the youngest fossils are on the top. Those are the most recently deceased organisms. So cladograms. So the simplest species, once again, are on the bottom, so down here, and the most complex are up here. And there's different ways to draw a cladogram. You might remember the ones we did in class that kind of look like this. Okay. These are a little bit different, though, because they show a little bit more than just that. So they show extinct species, so ones that don't make it to all the way at the top. So if this is a graph, this is time. Okay, so this one here, and this one, and this one, those all went extinct before modern day, so those are extinct species. And like we said, the y-axis represents time. So evolution basics and vocab, you might want to pause this and just read this over to make sure that you understand everything, but some major points. So the term evolution is a gradual change in species over time. Really important that you recognize that it's over time. Natural selection is those that are best adapted will be the most likely to survive and reproduce. So if you're not adding offspring to the current population, you're not helping the population. Adaptation, then, is a trait that helps that survival or reproduction from natural selection. Survival of the fittest is a very common term you've heard, and it just means that the best adapted individuals will be the most likely to survive. And how does it relate to evolution? Those who reproduce and survive pass down their helpful traits to future generations. So a little bit more vocab, so species and speciation. So a species, remember those two key things, reproduce in a natural environment and create fertile offspring. A population, that is a group of members of the same species. And then speciation is the formation of a new species. So genetic variation are just those differences in the same species. That's why we have different hair colors in a human population. That's why you see different sizes of deer or bunnies or whatever animal you can think of. And then how do genes in a species relate to evolution? So traits are controlled by genes, and those traits are acted upon by natural selection. So these traits in genetic variation that are beneficial are going to be the ones that are carried through. So how does it occur? So we have evolution over here as a whole. There's things like mutations, whether they're good or bad. You have migrations. You have genetic drift, which is also kind of movement, and then natural selection. So types of genetic variation, we have geographic differences, food source differences, and different environments. When you have two types of organisms competing for resources, and they have genetic variation, that's when you get that speciation. So we talked about divergent evolution or adaptive radiation. Those are all examples of speciation. So how does variation change? So we have four major ways. You have birth, and then the opposite of that is death. But you also have immigrate, which means in, and you have emigration, which means out. So birds leave the population or they join the population. So those are the four major ways you can add variation. So evolutionary evidence. So I think we're all pretty comfortable with the anatomical evidence. So remember homologous, analogous. Those are two. You need to know the difference. Homologous is same structure, different function. Analogous is different structure, same function. And those examples there, be sure you know those. Vestigial is still present but no longer functions. So like appendix, whale femur, ostrich wing, animals that have these things but they don't use them. We also have fossil evidence, DNA evidence, and embryological evidence, and we'll talk about each. So anatomical evidence, like we said, homologous is, if you look here at this picture, there's 3 different colors of bones. Those are all the same in all these organisms, and they're all mammals, mostly, except the bird. But they're all mammals, so they all have the same bone structure. Now, if you look at the analogous, we're looking here. Okay, birds and flies both have wings, but birds have bones and flies don't. But they do the same thing because they both use it to fly. So they're analogous. And then vestigials down here with the whale. Whales have a femur bone, but they no longer have hind legs, so there's no point for it. Fossil evidence, same thing. You have an organism that dies, such as this fish here. It becomes your fossil. Then this fish, as it dies, it becomes the fossil, and lakes and things change over time. So the water level changes and the different fossils form, and that's how we determine relationships. You also have DNA evidence. So if you look over here, this is amino acids that are in common or differ. There's not that much of a difference between a human and a rhesus monkey, and then a mouse is next. But look over here, like a lamprey doesn't have very much in common with a human. They still have some in common because we're all vertebrates, but not that much. Embryological evidence, this is just kind of showing development. If you look in this box here, this is early stages. They all look pretty similar. Yes, there are some differences, but not obviously so. Then you look down here, you have things like a fish, you have a turtle, you have a human. These are all different, but we all started kind of looking the same. So that's your embryological evidence. Types of evolution. So there's 4 types, and this is another part where you might want to pause and read through this. So we have adaptive radiation, coevolution, convergent evolution, and divergent evolution. We'll talk about examples. So adaptive radiation is one makes many. So in this picture, this is our one bird, and it made all of those from different genes existing and different things benefiting based on the environment. Coevolution is when they evolve together. So co means with or together. So evolve together because they need each other. Usually these are mutualistic relationships. All right, convergent evolution. These are when 2 things evolve similar traits, but they're not related. So they evolve similarly, but they're not related. So the biggest thing here is marsupials versus other mammals. They're both vertebrates, and they both have very similar characteristics, but a marsupial and another mammal have very different ways of having their young. Divergent evolution is 1 makes 2. So this is our initial butterfly here. We go to finally this one, which is like a teal and yellow, to here, which is like green and orange. So gradualism versus punctuated equilibrium. So most scientists follow this one, which is gradualism. This over here is punctuated equilibrium, which means it's just very steps. If you look, you have steps. This just shows that gradual change over time, which is what the theory of evolution states. Some other miscellaneous stuff, mimicry, that's when one looks like another. That one, it's important to note, is not poisonous, but it looks like something that is poisonous. So if you look at this snake, it's not poisonous. Well, this one is. But an animal isn't going to mess with either one because red means danger. And then what is a theory? It's built on one or more hypotheses supported by evidence. And why is it important to take all your antibiotics? We talked about this a little bit. The bacteria in your body are going to be resistant that didn't get killed from the first few pills of antibiotics. So then that in turn is going to make you sicker the next time because those superbugs can't be killed by antibiotics anymore. And then last up is types of selection. So once again, I would pause here and review. So directional selection, disruptive, stabilizing. So let's practice. So what type of selection is this? This is disruptive because it's going to favor the extremes, which isn't normal for a population. It's disruptive. This is going to be directional because it's shifting. So if you look at the initial is here, all it did was move over. And if we go back to those graphs, by the way, are over there. And then the last one is what? So we're favoring the middle or the average and getting rid of the extremes. So this is stabilizing. And that's it.